Welcome to the OxIgnite Podcast hosted by Yusuf, Raza, and Michael Hutson, two entrepreneurial MBA students at the University of Oxford. Together, we navigate the dynamic journeys of Oxford-linked founders, venture capitalists, and trailblazing innovators. Our mission, to fuel the fire in Oxford's next generation of boundary-pushing change makers. In Episode 2, Yusuf speaks with Joe Seddon, the founder and CEO of Zero Gravity, a mission-driven organization at the intersection of social impact and business that unlocks potential by mentoring talented students from low-opportunity backgrounds into uni, work, and life. Zero Gravity is an innovative platform that employs technology to level the educational playing field, facilitating access to top-tier universities and careers for students from underprivileged backgrounds. It's a model that promises to reshape narratives around social mobility, creating value for not just students, but also universities, employers, and society at large. We explore Joe's personal journey from a low-opportunity background through his transformative years at Oxford University to the genesis of Zero Gravity. It's a narrative that defies the norm, highlighting how ambition, resilience, and an unwavering focus can drive social change while disrupting established paradigms. Join us as we delve into the mechanics of Zero Gravity and its financial future, shining a light on its partnerships with influential firms like HSBC, KPMG, and Morgan Stanley. Discover what it truly means to create a brand that resonates deeply with its stakeholders, how it's about much more than just logos and color schemes. Throughout the podcast, we also touch on the nuances of mental wellness and the challenges of being an early-stage founder. Joe shares his insights on balancing the rigors of entrepreneurship with maintaining peak mental fitness, offering an intimate look into the makings of a social entrepreneur. This is an episode that will inspire you, provoke thought, and spark meaningful discussions. It's a peek into the exciting world of social entrepreneurship and a testament to the power of unwavering dedication and vision. Tune in for an enlightening conversation that is sure to leave you with more than a few valuable takeaways. Get ready, get set, get OxIgnited.
Hey Joe, welcome to the podcast. Really glad to have you here. So, to introduce Joe, Joe is the founder and CEO of Zero Gravity, a mission-driven business that unlocks potential by mentoring talented students from low-opportunity backgrounds into uni, work, and life. Now, Joe has raised £4 million of social impact investment to scale the business. He has been recognized in the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. He's received a social impact award from the Prime Minister, and he's been honored with the British Empire Medal and King Charles Birthday Honours list. Oh, Joe, that's very, those are some achievements you would be really proud of at such a young age. So, could you just give us a brief introduction of what Zero Gravity does?
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast, Yusuf. I think in terms of what Zero Gravity does, it all goes back to my own personal story. Now, I was originally, I grew up in a small town in the UK called Morley, which is between Leeds and Wakefield. It's a post-industrial town in West Yorkshire. And I saw firsthand as a student from a sort of single parent background who went to state schools, all the barriers that you face as a ambitious student from a low opportunity background if you want to break into elite institutions. And when I graduated from university, I wanted to do something about it. And I reflected on how technology in particular had completely transformed my own life. And I was one of those young people who was on the sort of the brink of Generation Z and Millennial. And I grew up when the Facebook came out, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Deliveroo and Uber, all of these high-scale tech apps that completely disrupted various different industries. And I thought, why has no one really leveraged technology to try and find an answer to social mobility? Now, how do you identify the top talent from low opportunity backgrounds who would otherwise struggle to reach their potential and make sure they can access elite institutions? So Zero Gravity in many ways was born from my own personal problem. I wanted to help the next generation of students just like me. And my vision was to grow it as a tech startup. And the reason for that is I believe that the issue of social mobility and how do you make sure there's not that connection between people's background and what they can achieve, I thought it'd been mischaracterized historically as a charitable issue, like a philanthropic issue. That people saw it through the lens of social justice and how can we create a society which is equal, fair, works for everyone. And although that's a big part of it, I thought people had missed the economic dimension of social mobility, which is how can you create a society in which the talent of everyone is fully utilized, and every big institution, whether it's leading employers or universities, they've all got skin in the game when it comes to having the very best people. And in the current society we live in, those institutions tend to only recruit people from a very small subset of backgrounds. So that's not just bad for society, but that's bad for the economy. So I thought there was an economic angle to this issue that hadn't been explored. So that's why I created Zero Gravity as a tech startup. They're leveraging technology to solve this problem at scale in a way that would create economic value for employers, universities, and ultimately from that create a self-sustaining business model.
Could you tell me a bit more about these barriers that students from underprivileged backgrounds face when it comes to breaking into elite institutions?
Sure. I think just to bring it to life through data, first and foremost, there's this really nerdy economics concept called the intergenerational elasticity of income. And essentially what it measures is the link between what your parents earn and then what you earn through your lifetime. So societies which have a lower elasticities are ones where there's a less of a link between your parents' earnings and your earnings, and ones that have got a really high elasticity as well as a really close connection between your parents' success and your own success. And in the UK, we live in a society where the elasticity is 45%. Which essentially means 45% of any income you earn throughout your entire lifetime can be predicted from what your parents earned. And that's a really weird society when you think about it. Like almost £1 in £2 of everything you earn can be attributed back to your background. And other countries do a far better job on this measurement scale. If you look at the Scandinavian societies, for instance, it's more like 15%. That's a markedly different feel to a society, a big difference in terms of the link between your background and what you can achieve. And the way this issue kind of happens is it tends to cluster initially in the education system. In the UK, for instance, if you're from a more wealthy background, you tend to live in an area with better performing state schools, with better teaching, more resources. Your parents can afford online tutors to help you with your education, get better grades. You can also be exposed to more cultural experiences to build your cultural capital, more access to work experience, and your uncle giving you that a week of informal work experience as business. And also the kind of confidence tailwind that comes from that, being part of networks of other people who are at elite institutions, whether they be employees at universities, and feeling like you're destined for success rather than failure. Now, those are all the things that create this really big gap in the UK between those from affluent and advantaged backgrounds and those from low opportunity backgrounds. There's a really big problem, but ultimately I don't think it's intractable. There's a whole load of talented people out there who are currently being failed by the system. But if you give them support and mentorship, they can break through the barriers and ultimately break that link between their background and their potential. And ultimately, that is the problem that Zero Gravity is trying to solve. And we're not just trying to solve it for hundreds of people, we're trying to solve it for tens of thousands of people in the UK to really try and make a difference between who it is who accesses these elite institutions.
So, I mean, you yourself ended up at Oxford, which is, one of the most elite institutions in the world. How was your experience there, and how do you think that shaped you to be the entrepreneur and the leader that you're today?
Well, it was a big deal for someone from my background to get into Oxford University. And knowing that my family had never been to Oxford before, I went to a good state school in Yorkshire, but it was only a state school where a sort of trickle of people every year were going to Oxbridge, and no one really for the subject I studied, philosophy, politics, and economics. So I was almost firing sort of semi-blind when it came to going through the admissions process. I didn't really know what to expect. And it was really tough. I remember going to my interviews and just feeling completely like a fish out of water, going into the sort of dreamy spires of Oxford, sitting down in these sort of medieval rooms with academics who would then question me about my subject. And that experience shouldn't have felt overwhelming, but to a 17-year-old from West Yorkshire, from a single parent family, I've been prepped for it. it was an incredibly overwhelming experience. And my first interview went so badly, I thought I'd completely flunked my chances. And I almost just gave up at that point and thought, I've got nothing to lose. I've messed up. I'm just going to relax in the rest of my interviews and have a good time. And it was only by doing that that I actually then improved in my subsequent interviews and got an offer. So I'm very thankful in many ways that my first interview was so bad. Otherwise, I don't think I would have got a place. So I saw these issues firsthand. And when I was at university, that was also quite a big cultural shift for me because I suddenly was mixing with people from very different backgrounds from my own. West Yorkshire is quite an insular place. The vast majority of people who grow up in my town, they stay there, get married there, have children there. It's quite insular, and suddenly I was mixing with a far greater group of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different parts of the UK, different countries as well. And at the beginning, it was quite difficult. I had the imposter syndrome. I wondered, do I belong at a university like Oxford? Am I good enough to be here? And I also had a little bit of guilt as well, almost like a social mobility guilt that I was kind of fleeing the nest, and moving away from home, and almost like losing a part of myself through that. And my friends back in West Yorkshire used to joke that I was turning into a posho by going to Oxford. And even though it was sort of done in a jokey way, there was kind of a dark truth behind that, which is that I was changing my identity gradually over time by being part of a very different institution and culture to where I grew up. And that sort of created a bit of a identity crisis as well. So I sort of stuck in the middle of imposter syndrome on the one hand, this social mobility guilt on the other. And that created issues with belonging. And I think a lot of students like me go through that process at university. And I sort of look back on that now and almost think, why did I feel like that? No, I should have embraced my roots. I should have put myself out there a little bit more. But it's difficult to do that in the moment unless you have that support network around you. And again, that's what we're trying to change through Zero Gravity. Not just creating a platform that breaks people into these institutions, but supports them whilst they're there into top careers and builds a community of ambitious people from these backgrounds who can sort of share their experiences, their successes, their failures, their struggles, and so people know they're not alone and they're going through it together with other people like them.
So when and why did you decide to start Zero Gravity? Was this during university itself, or did you first graduate and then end up starting after that?
So I had the idea whilst I was at university, but I waited until I graduated to put the idea into execution. I had a number of job offers from different corporates, Magic Circle law firm, hedge funds, but I knew I didn't want to go work for a corporate. I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur. That was my true passion. So when I graduated, I moved back home to my childhood bedroom in Morley in West Yorkshire, and set about creating a bootstrapped startup from my bedroom. And it was really difficult at first because the only kind of startup capital I had was the final 200 quid that I had left from my student loan. And the 200 quid doesn't get you too far, right? But what I kind of learned was when you don't have much resources at the beginning, it kind of forces you to be creative and innovative. And that's one of the great things about not having too much capital straight away. The constraint of not having loads of investment that forces you to be lean and think in different ways to different people. So straight away I was thinking, how can I build tech on a shoestring? How can I make sure that I'm automating processes so I don't need to pay people to do things? And just that entire process, it led to what became the kind of MVP version of the Zero Gravity platform, which at the beginning just focused on identifying top talent from low-income backgrounds and breaking them into Oxford and Cambridge. So I piloted the idea at Oxbridge first to sort of prove that it could work. And it was only at that point that I then expanded the platform to more universities, to focusing on careers as well. And I needed equity funding to do that because at that point, the rate of growth was so large that I needed investment to keep going. But at the beginning, it was completely bootstrapped. And even though it was really, really difficult, I think that forced a lot of the innovation, which eventually led to the business growing so quickly.
I think Just curious over there because there might be some people who are investors or VCs who might listen to this. Are you in a position where you're still looking to raise, or is it a case where you've raised enough and now you're in a position to just grow based off the?
Yeah, so we're growing the business on the tech startup model. So we expect to be raising equity investment for at least for the next 5 years. Now, this is a business which I believe at scale can not only be incredibly socially impactful, transforming the lives of so many people, but I think it can be a great a financial investment as well. And ultimately, all of these institutions, employees and universities, massively benefit from social mobility. They're spending a lot of money on trying to solve this problem. And zero gravity, in many ways, I think, can be the go-to solution. First in the UK, and then internationally, support institutions to really recruit and cultivate socially mobile talent. So we're a revenue generating organization. We've got commercial partnerships with great businesses, HSBC, KPMG, Morgan Stanley, law firms, and businesses across a whole load of different sectors. And we're scaling that up, but we're constantly reinvesting our revenue because we don't want to create a kind of small social enterprise, and we want to create something that works at scale. And to do that, you have to continue to invest in technology because the technology is the magic that makes everything work, helps us identify the students, support them, and make sure that the platform is actually impactful, tangibly increasing people's chances of getting into these institutions, and eventually means we can scale zero gravity outside the UK as well to more jurisdictions. So we're investing ahead of future growth because we don't want this to be a platform that helps thousands of people. We want this to be a platform that helps tens of thousands of people in the UK and ultimately millions internationally. And that's why we chose to go down the tech startup route rather than doing everything bootstrapped.
Understood. Why do you choose the name Zero Gravity? What does that signify to you?
When I started Zero Gravity, I thought really deeply about what sort of brand I wanted to create. I think a lot of startup founders don't really think about brand at the beginning. It's sort of like people think that brand is just having a logo or a website or a color scheme. But brand isn't about logos. Brand is ultimately about the emotional connection you want to create with the people who interact with your company, whether they're customers, social media followers, people in your team, investors. So it goes right to the heart of what you are. So when I sort of was first founding the business, I sort of sat down and I thought, what is the mission behind this business? What is its key values? What are our key beliefs? The things that we think about the world that no one else does. And what sort of tone of voice do I want it to have as well? And when I thought about Zero Gravity, I wanted it to be a business that ultimately tackles almost that gravitational force that pins talented people down and means they can't escape the constraints of their background. So there was that kind of gravity metaphor, which I'd seen people talk about before. I'd seen people from these backgrounds speak about almost it felt like there was an invisible force pinning them down. I thought it was quite an interesting metaphor in that. I mean, I wanted to create a business that was empowering, that focused on unlocking people's talent, not kind of fetishizing their disadvantage. I think one of the big issues in the sector that I operate in is that it's dominated by a lot of charities who have very charitable brands. So they focus in a lot on the problem. And although it's really important to understand the problem, if you always talk about it too much to your target audience, the people start to think that the system is completely skewed against them, and they can give up. They can think, "There's no way I can break through these barriers. There's no way I can defy the odds. That my potential is determined by my background." So I wanted to create a brand that moved away from focusing on people's disadvantage to instead focusing on their talent, which is where the zero bit came from. Not focusing on the gravity that pins people down, but focusing on the process of really unlocking their potential so they can escape it. So that's where the zero gravity name came from. And we've really tried to build a kind of B2C, very youthful brand that sort of speaks to our target audience. Now, we didn't want to create an institutional brand that would appeal to academics or would appeal to corporates. We wanted to create a brand that would appeal to our primary audience, and that is the ambitious students who we serve.
This really resonates with me as well. So I come from sort of like a middle or say middle upper class family in India, and then I was quite fortunate for things to work out. Ended up going to Singapore for my undergraduate studies and so on. But what I've come to realize is for a lot of people in the middle class, there's a lot of initial inertia. People think that, oh, I can't do this because I'm not, some things are not meant for me, just because I'm in this background. So I won't even think big. They downsize their ambitions because they believe that's not meant for them in life. Whereas what's true is you just need that initial push. This could be as simple as, someone introducing you to someone who then inspires you, right? There's that thing, right? Where it's like when you surround yourself with a certain kind of people and then you're with them, and then, like how they think, how they dream about what they want to achieve in life and so on. Once you're in that, you can really kind of like go, that kind of like really unleashes you. Whereas, at least for me and India and the middle class would have seen as, it's very, like, okay, you can only do what middle class people have traditionally done, and thinking beyond those boundaries is something that's meant for, like more privileged people in life. You don't have that privilege as, like more of the common folk or the plebs, if you want to put it that way, right? So this
I,
really resonates with me.
I think that's absolutely right. No, people's personal development is not a linear process. It's very non-linear. So like, rather than growing like that, it tends to be sort of like that, and that does mean that sort of these sliding door moments can be quite important. Meeting the right person at the right time, or getting that opportunity that puts you in a completely different track. That can be so important because it can lead to that like a ripple effect through your life, where one thing leads to another, and you get put on that accelerated personal development journey. Like at the beginning of this episode, you very kindly sort of reeled out my headlines about the awards from Prime Minister and the recent honour in the King's Honours List and the Forbes 30 under 30. But all those things would have seemed completely unfathomable 4 years ago. And I looked at people who had achieved those things and thought, I can never achieve that. It feels so far away. And I didn't get to that through a linear growth. I got to it through a kind of development journey where things reinforced themselves. So the platform, Zero Gravity platform, took off. We got media coverage of some of the success stories, and then that got picked up by the Prime Minister's team, and that's where the award came from. And then that led to more growth, and then that led to the Forbes 30 under 30, and then that led to the King's Honours List. All these things are all interconnected in a cycle, and that means that if you can, the really important thing to do is to kind of catalyze the beginning of that cycle. Get someone on that pathway to personal growth. Because if you're someone who is ambitious, you're talented, and you're willing to work hard, then you've got all the fundamentals there for success. You just need someone to help you get on the right pathway, and that's very much how I see Zero Gravity. It's a catalytic platform for pushing people in the first steps of their journey onto the right path, and then continuing that journey with them to make sure the support's there, but ultimately backing their potential and their ability to just go out and do it. And when you do that, the end result can be exponential, because the nature of working with talented people is that if you back them and they make it, they can achieve things which are beyond your imagination. We've had so many cases of people who've used the platform who've just gone on to achieve mind-boggling things. We had a great feature a year ago of a student called Millie, who was from a travelling showman background in the UK. She dropped out of school at the age of 13 to work on the family fairground. She'd almost failed her GCSEs, but she joined Zero Gravity. She got a mentor who helped her self-study Latin, and she engaged with content on our platform. They did lots of mentorship sessions, and ended up getting an offer to study classics at Oxford University. One of the most sort of prestigious and also privately educated skewed courses you can find, and that's almost a mind-boggling story. Someone who dropped out of school, self-taught Latin, became one of the first traveling showmen to get an offer at Oxford University, but she was able to do that because zero gravity acted as a catalyst for the potential ambition and determination that was already there within her. So it's not like we're creating these things. It's already there inside you. Often people just need a push in the right direction and a bit of ongoing support to make their way on the journey.
So when we talk about your journey with zero gravity itself, what have been your proudest moments so far?
I think the proudest moments is like seeing some of the people who've used the platform not only become incredibly successful in of themselves, but become kind of ambassadors for the next generation. Because for me, that's all about creating a community that really changes the culture about what you can do and achieve in the UK if you're from a low opportunity background. We've had some fantastic coverage over the past couple of months, and last week it was like Refugee Week in the UK, where a lot of different refugees were being profiled in the press, and one of the students on our platform, Fiona Zaker, who is from is a second generation refugee. Her parents fled the genocide in Kosovo, and she did a big article in the Metro newspaper speaking about how zero gravity supported her journey and what she's doing now at Oxford University. And that had so much fantastic response from other second generation, first generation refugees, and it inspired loads of them to sign up to the zero gravity platform. And that just sort of shows that link between someone's personal success, but then how it knocks down barriers for the next generation. And so seeing stories like that makes me incredibly proud of what zero gravity has helped to achieve, because it's helped turn our members not just into success stories, but into kind of beacons of hope for the next generation.
It's really beautiful to hear. What have been some of the major challenges that you've faced as a social entrepreneur, starting from a young age, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think there was that big challenge about not having access to capital at the beginning of my journey. I couldn't have access to friends and family funding. I didn't live in those networks. I didn't have a big network within tech startups. So it took time to sort of build a network of investors and people who could mentor and support me. And I had to leave my hometown of Morley in West Yorkshire and move to London in order to do that. I think one of the real difficulties in the UK is it's such a geographically unequal society. London really dominates everything, and you do have these other urban hubs like Manchester, Leeds, and Birmingham, but they still can't really compete with just the kind of the size and energy and the amount of financial capital which London has, which makes it quite difficult to grow tech startups in those areas. So that was difficult, having to leave my hometown to move to London. I think the other thing was also just being a young founder who was doing this for the very first time, didn't really know what they were doing, having to sort of learn a lot on the go. There's no kind of manual that tells you how to grow a company. If you're growing an innovative company, you're going to be quite unique by definition. You're not just recreating and scaling something that someone's done before. You're creating something on a completely different model from scratch. So there's no textbook about how to grow that company. So the only way you can succeed as a young founder is by trying stuff, failing, pivoting quickly, speaking to people who've gone on similar journeys in other startups, really trying to build a network of mentors, of people who can support you. And those people aren't going to have the kind of silver bullet either, but at least they can give you the benefit of their experience in a different context. But also just consuming lots of content as well. Now, I listen to so many different startup podcasts, and it's just really interesting to hear the experiences of other people who've been part of these fast-growing companies. And I love podcasts like 20 VC with Harry Stebbings. He's got a great story about how he grew that out of his bedroom. But I'd really encourage people to really consume as much content about the startup sector as possible, and learn from other startups in different industries from your own, and really be proactive about trying to build that mentorship network if you're not somebody who's built loads of startups before.
You had a post, I think a week or two ago, where you were sharing a bit more about your approach towards leadership, team building. Could you elaborate on that for the audience?
Sure. So in many ways, I never regarded myself as a natural leader. Like I'm quite an introverted person. Now, I might not appear like that in public or even in the office, because you're in a certain role and position where you feel more comfortable and you're confident and you have to exude a certain a certain style. But I'm at nature an introvert, and I was kind of pushed into leadership rather than searching it out as something I wanted to do. I was always more comfortable sort of being a introverted founder, building a tech platform, than I was being a kind of leader, hiring and managing and growing people within a business. And that was a skill that I had to kind of learn over time. And what I found is that you've got to create a leadership style which is authentic to you. And one of the things I really tried to push early doors was a real big emphasis on culture, because that is something that I believe is incredibly important. Like making sure people are aligned with the zero gravity mission, that they believe in the same values that I think are important. They're not just these kind of tokenistic values that a lot of companies throw about that don't really mean anything, but the things that are really unique and distinctive about zero gravity. And a real emphasis on high performance as well. The characteristics that I really appreciate in others. And I was just kind of tyrannical about that, having a really clear sense and definition of what I wanted zero gravity to become, and only hiring people who kind of fit that mold, and creating a culture that was in many ways quite cultish in terms of really embedding that mission, those values, that nature of high performance. And I think you've got to do that as a startup, because the culture is absolutely existential. That is the difference between success and failure in a small business. Because if you're in a startup, you're not destined to succeed. Even when you're at the sort of Series A level of startup, only 10% of those startups eventually go on to become successful companies. The vast majority still fail. And the difference between success and failure isn't just about company strategy. It's not just about the idea. It's not just about the investors and capital you can raise. It's ultimately about the ability of people in your team to execute on the vision. And that all comes from culture. Having the right people, having them aligned, having them believing in the same core things, and having a way for people to collaborate and want to sort of get out of bed in the morning and really go for it. So I put a massive emphasis on culture. I think that's something that a lot of startup leaders overlook, because they see it as a secondary concern, that they're far more concentrated on raising investment, thinking about the vision, the company strategy. But culture is the difference between being able to execute and not being able to execute. So I built my leadership style around trying to really build this very unique culture at zero gravity and exude it in everything that we do.
Goes in line with that saying, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, there's that aspect where you're always, working really hard when it comes to early stage startups or so. And as a founder, it's even more stressful at times, because you might feel like you don't have anyone to kind of like share your issues that you might be facing, right? What has been your approach towards stress, or like just managing your mental wellness? Uh,
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question. Like there's that debate is that are entrepreneurs like born or are they made? And I think it's a bit of a cop out answer, but I think the truth is it's a little bit of both. You need to be somebody who has a huge amount of resilience in order to be a startup founder, because you're trying to defy the odds. You're battling against the tide. You're going to have a lot of setbacks, a lot of failures, and you need to be absolutely laser focused on your vision in order to push through that. And also the nature of an early stage business is there's a lot of random variation. It takes time sometimes for your strategies to pay off, and you get little bits of luck that come out of nowhere. And then stuff that you spend a lot of time on just doesn't work, sometimes just for the most random of reasons that you could almost never predict. So there's a lot of random variation and uncertainty, and you need to be somebody who's able to handle that. If you're somebody who always wants complete certainty and stability in what you're doing, you're going to find it really difficult to be a startup founder. So there are definitely some parts of your constitution that you really need, that resilience, that ability to deal with uncertainty and ambiguity, and the kind of real drive and determination to keep going. But a lot of it can be learned as well. And I think as a startup founder, you almost need to see yourself as like a professional athlete. There was a really interesting article in the FT yesterday about a VC fund, Boulderton Capital, who were sort of pushing this idea that startup founders should think a lot more about their own performance rather than just their company's performance. Because ultimately, as a founder in an early stage business, the entire business is going to be incredibly dependent on you. Like, you are the person who sets the vision, sets the strategy, that the culture in many ways is an emanation of your own personality. You are the kind of mouthpiece, the spokesperson of the organization. If you don't perform, the business isn't going to perform. You very, very rarely get a startup that goes on to be successful where the founder is a complete non-performer. You may have founders that get outgrown by the business, but at that early stage, and the founder needs to be the top performer in the business. So you have to think of yourself almost like a professional athlete. How can you cultivate your own sense of performance? So if you're if you're not doing things to sort of keep yourself in good mental shape, then you're not going to be able to perform over the long term. So I think founders need to think deeply about that, and you have to appreciate it's going to be a high stress environment. There's not going to be a work-life balance. There's no way to get around that. You've got to work out what are the things in your life you can control and can do to keep yourself mentally fit. And in my own experience, I really prioritized a couple of different things. I love football. The football was probably my first passion in life, and I made sure that even as Zero Gravity was growing as a business, I still made time on a Saturday to be able to go watch my team, Hull City, playing football, because that was just a small thing that gave me that kind of break for half a day of not having to think about work and allow me to concentrate on another passion. And it sounds small, but just the kind of mental relief that gives you is I found to be quite dramatic. So everyone needs to find that one or two other things in their life that gives them that mental relief. It might be having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It might be doing a certain passion. It might be making sure you've got some carved out time with your friends. But you have to think of yourself as an athlete with a certain level of performance you need to get to and sustain. And that means really thinking deeply about the way you live your life, not just the way that your company is set up. Because as an early stage founder, it's all dependent on you, whether you like it or not.
I was speaking with someone else this morning, and he mentioned prioritization as well. And I find it quite interesting, as a founder, the same way you have to prioritize as a small startup strapped for funds to, grow your business. It's the same that kind of applies to finding that balance of, your work and your personal life as well. Of course, it's compared to other jobs, the difference here is that if you're in other jobs where you don't have a work-life balance, you're being paid a lot of money, right? But with startups, it's you're building that vision on the hope that someday this is going to be a big thing, and then you've got all these people on your team who believe in you and to lead them towards achieving that vision. So just a final question to close things off. What advice would you have to any other social entrepreneurs out there? Any budding social entrepreneurs out there?
I think this is a really exciting time for social entrepreneurship because when I founded Zero Gravity back in 2018, this idea of social entrepreneurship wasn't really well understood in the UK. Everyone had this quite binary distinction between a business on the one side that was all about creating value for shareholders, morally agnostic, and then charities on the other hand that are all about investing money in solving social problems and they are morally virtuous. And what people have now come to realize is there is something in between, which is you can be a business with a clear mission, solving a social problem, but also doing it in a way with a sustainable business model, which also means that those investors who invest in your idea early doors can also benefit alongside the huge amount of social impact you create. And there's been a number of big notable mission-driven startups that have succeeded. And I think that has changed the kind of understanding and reputation of the idea of social entrepreneurship. That people now see this as a new form of growing a startup. And I think that's great because when it comes to access to capital and support, there's so much more of that out there nowadays than there was in 2018. Like you had very few social impact funds operating in the UK and Europe in 2018. Now there's so many social impact funds, and almost every single standard VC fund has a social impact or ESG component to what it does. So this is a great time to be a social entrepreneur. The timing is absolutely right. And my advice to people in terms of getting going would be find a social problem that you don't think is currently being solved very well, and find a innovative new solution to that problem. And it really is as simple as that. In my own case, I saw social mobility as a huge problem. Employers were talking about it, universities, politicians, but the solutions weren't particularly great. They were very old school, manual, non-tech, low scale. And I set out to create a kind of tech-driven, high-scale solution to this issue. So it was as simple as that. So really think deeply about coming up with something innovative that works, and then just get going. Just get going. The nature of startup is everything's so fast moving. You can't afford to wait. You just need to get an MVP designed, created, get it out there, learn from the feedback, iterate on it, and that's how you'll start something that grows. Don't spend 18 months locked up in your bedroom writing a business plan or thinking deeply about the problem. You need to do a little bit of thinking, but most of it is about executing. You can only find out by doing a lot of the time. So just get going, embrace the uncertainty and imperfection. And if you've got a good idea and your execution's strong, why can't you defy the odds and grow something great?
Hey, Joe, you've shared a lot of wisdom, and it's been wonderful listening to your journey in this podcast. How can people best reach you? And also, where's the best place for them to learn more about zero gravity?
Sure. So if you want to find out more about Zero Gravity, our website is zerogravity.co.uk. We are at Zero Gravity on every single social media platform, so you can find us there as well. And if anyone wants to find out more about being a social entrepreneur, or you're a first-time founder who wants to start a business, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I benefit so much personally from being able to speak to loads of cool young people with great ideas, and I'm keen to give back to the next generation. But I also learn a lot from people who were in my position a couple of years ago. So if you are someone like that, please do feel free to reach out.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning into OxIgnite. Please reach out to Yusuf, Raza, or Michael Hutson on LinkedIn if you are an entrepreneur with ties to Oxford and want to create more awareness about your venture, or if you are an investor interested in investing in Oxford-linked startups, or if you are a brand that wants to sponsor an episode of the OxIgnite podcast. If you like this podcast, please help us spread the word to your network. We would also welcome any donations to help us scale this podcast. You can donate at buymeacoffee.com/OxIgnite, OXIGNITE.